Hello and welcome. My name is Dan Bullock, and today we're going to be going over the rules for No Motherland Without. This is the latest release from Lockhorn's Games. It's a two-player card-driven strategy game highlighting tensions between North Korea and the West from 1953 to present day. So why don't we take a close look? We'll begin with going over the objective of the game. Victory will be determined either by prestige, marked over here, or by final score. Prestige in DPRK reflects the Kim regime's standing in the DPRK. If DPRK ever have high prestige and are successful in launching a missile test event, then they will claim victory immediately. If, however, the DPRK's prestige ever falls below critical at the end of the resolution phase, then the West will claim immediate victory. If victory isn't determined by prestige, then we will proceed to final score after playing the full number of turns, which will vary from game to game based on the play of events. Final score is going to be a comparison of infrastructure improvements on the map to the number of marked defectors and marked dissidents on the board. Each active dissident is worth 5 victory points at the end of score. Each marked defector is worth 3. And each level of infrastructure improvement is worth a single point. If both scores are tied during final scoring, then the winner will be the side that has the highest reserves. If both sides have the same level of reserves and the same score, then the DPRK wins. So we're going to go over the parts of the board, just identifying terms you'll probably see on some of these event cards referred, starting with our map of the DPRK. So here we have a total of 13 provinces and special cities. Adjacency is going to be pretty important for some of the functions of the board. Everything's clearly labeled. These 3 areas in orange are our special cities. They follow slightly different rules than the other areas, but we'll get into that in a moment. And we have these event boxes. They can mark whether events have been played or used during the course of the game. When marking these, you can feel free to use cubes that aren't being used for dissidents or deceased people, however you'd like. Over here in the upper left, we see DPRK and West reserves. These statuses will change throughout the game as points are invested in them. Then we see the prestige in DPRK, which will be moved by events. We have our turn track, turns number 1 through 7. Beneath the terms, you'll see these icons. They refer to the standard of living threshold. This is the number of infrastructure improvements plus elites that are needed in order to meet the standard of living threshold to prevent the prestige from falling during the resolution phase. And then over here we have the global opinion. Global opinion marker will be moving back and forth based on the play of certain events. Those events will have icons on them that refer to the global opinion, shifting it either toward favoring the West, favoring DPRK, or moving it toward the center. And each play of an event will only ever shift the global opinion 1 space. Depending on where the global opinion is located, there will be a different advantage conferred to either player based on who it's in favor of. As it moves farther and farther one direction or the other, you'll get more advantages, and these advantages are cumulative, so you will have all the advantages of being favored as the West or DPRK as it moves. Over here on the right side of the board, we have the generation map. This reflects the 3 generations of Korean people living in the DPRK and the impact of these different events and policies on them throughout. Each generation is marked in a light color border, and then they each apply to a specific era of the game. So these first 3 rows of citizens are part of the Juche era. That is turns 1 through 3 when you'll be playing with these cards with the black backing. And then the second active generation will be the Sogan era, and that'll be these white event cards when they are in play. And then we have a separate generation that will just be active for the final turn of the game whenever that is triggered. And then below these citizens, we see the defector map. This map is where defector routes are going to be established and uncovered by both players, as well as where citizens will be defecting. And beside that, we have the rations track. Rations track is only affected by the play of events. As the rations track is reduced, it will add AP to activities where players are going to be causing citizens to defect. So as the rations track goes down, there will be more and more points to be allotted toward defecting. And at the very bottom of the board on the lower right, we see the enduring events track. And that will be where we mark what enduring events are currently in play. We'll go over that more in a moment. Let's go over the game sequence. So each game will have a maximum number of 7 turns. The first 3 turns will be playing in the Juche era using this black deck. And turns 4 and after will be using cards from the white Song and Era deck. These decks will never be shuffled in with one another, and each event card is only going to be used 1 time at most. So let's look at the turn sequence. At the start of every single turn, each player is going to be dealt up to a hand of 8 cards, and the West will be deciding whether they want to act first or second. They will play a single card, either for its event or for activities, and then the other player will then play a single card, and they will alternate until neither player has any cards remaining. That is the bulk of the game, the action phase, followed by the resolution phase. Now during the resolution phase, the DPRK player is going to be comparing the number of infrastructure improvements plus the number of elites in the active generation only that they have. If that number meets or exceeds the standard of living threshold, no change is made. But if they have fewer points and improvements and elites than the standard of living threshold, prestige will be reduced by 1 level. After the resolution phase, we proceed to the cleanup phase. Any outage markers that are on the board will be removed from the map, and any events that have an until the end of turn effect will also be placed in the discard pile. And that's it, and then we proceed on to the next turn. So we're going to take a look at the event cards. These are the meat of our game. They come in 3 different varieties. So here we have the gray band with both flags. These are our unassociated events. Unassociated events will have an effect that is either shared by both players, or they will have their flag depicted and then text highlighted in their color, and that will be the effect that they carry out when this event is played by a given player. Then we have our blue band events. These are going to be for the West, and our red band events, and these are for the DPRK. When these events are played, they'll trigger their effect, and then they're placed immediately in the discard. Aside from our one-time events, we have legacy events. Cards like this one, when played for the event, wouldn't have an immediate effect. However, they'll be placed over in the play area where both players can see their impact, and they will be in effect for the remainder of the game. And then our final type of event is enduring events. Enduring events last more than a single turn, but they won't be in the game for the remainder of the game like the legacy events. When these are played instead, they're going to be placed on the first available space here on the enduring events track. When future enduring events are played, they'll occupy the first space, and all other enduring events on the track will rotate down a single space. When the track is completely full and we needed to play another enduring event into this first space, whatever's on the bottom of the track will then rotate into the discard pile, and everything else will shift down to accommodate that card. The Aid from Beijing and Aid from the Kremlin cards will be available until either an event flips them to their unavailable side. So in this case, this event card, the Rangoon Bombing, would flip the Aid from Beijing card to its unavailable side and shift global opinion. But future events may also be played that will flip these aid cards from unavailable back to available again. So just by sheer fact that you haven't used them doesn't mean that they'll always be available to you at any given time. Likewise, just because they have been used doesn't mean events won't make them available again in the future. You want to be so much shrewd about when you use these aid cards. The Aid from the Kremlin card will only be available during the Juche era. That's these black-backed cards, turns 1 through 3. After the Juche era ends, the collapse of the Soviet Union will mean that the Aid from the Kremlin card will go out of the game. However, you'll have the Aid from Beijing card with you for the remainder of the game. And these cards are only ever going to be used by the DPRK. They do not get handed to the West at any time, so it'll be up to the DPRK to manage them effectively. So we're going to take a closer look at the action rounds which make up our action phase. Each action round, a player is going to play a card from their hand, and they'll be choosing to either play the card for the event, if it is their event, or to conduct activities using the value of that card. So if this were the first card play or a card play of the West players, and they would be choosing between playing this event or playing it for the AP, for the activity points. If this card were being played by the DPRK, because this event is not an unassociated event or one of the red DPRK events, they will have to trigger the effect of this event first. And then after dealing with the ramifications of this very bad event, then they will be able to play the card for activities. So each of the activities that both players have available to them are completely unique for each power. So we're going to take a look, but I'm going to be bouncing a bit back and forth just to give you a little bit of an idea of the context and why these activities are going to be done during the course of the game. So we're going to start over here with a look at this map. And the first activity we're going to look at is for the DPRK, and that's placing infrastructure improvements. Now, we pointed out that these 3 orange areas are special cities, and the remainder of these areas are provinces. When you play a card for AP to place infrastructure improvements, you'll be paying to place them into spaces that are either containing an improvement or adjacent to a space containing an improvement. At the start of the game, during setup, there will be no improvements currently on the map. So the only 3 spaces that you can place when there are no improvements already out or adjacent are the special cities. They do not require adjacency of any kind. Once you have improvements out on the map, with a card such as this one that's worth 3 points, you'd be able to place improvements into the adjacent areas, into special cities that don't have them, or add points of infrastructure improvements to areas that already have a level. The value of each of these pieces is going to be different. The cost in AP to place a level 1 improvement, which is your big red disc, is a single point. To place the second level improvements, which are white discs, will be 2 points. And the third level improvements are very pricey and spiffy indeed, and they cost 3 points total. Now, at the end of game, when we're dealing with final score, each level of improvement is still only worth 1 victory point, regardless of the number of AP that it costs to build the improvement. When we are placing improvements, it's based on the adjacency we had at the start of the turn. So I can't, for 3 points, place one here in Pyongyang, then one here, and then one up here, despite having no adjacency at the start of the turn. I would only be able to place in spaces that I had improvements adjacent at the very, very start before playing a card. The West, as an activity, can place outages onto the map in a province or special city at the cost of 1 AP each. Every area on the map can receive an outage marker, and they do not need to be placed with any kind of adjacency. The only limitation with outage markers is that Pyongyang cannot receive an outage marker unless every other area of the map has already received one. If an area has an outage marker, it cannot receive an infrastructure improvement for the remainder of the term. If that space already has an infrastructure improvement on it, that outage marker prevents it from being further improved. When these are in an area like this, the DPRK player would be able to place improvements in the spaces that don't have outages, but they can't place into these areas. Thus, this cuts off their adjacency to other parts of the board. When you place an outage marker on a space that already has an improvement on it, the DPRK will still be able to place improvements in spaces that are adjacent to the area regardless of the outage marker. So outages only prevent the placement within the spaces that they are, not preventing them from placing adjacent to the spaces that have outage markers, if that makes any sense. So in order to get our citizens to defect from the DPRK, before we can do that, we're going to need to place defector routes. Defector routes are going to have a faint outline on the defector map, either blue or red. That'll indicate what color route would be placed in those spaces. On the other side of a given route is going to be a space, and those spaces will also have a color indicating whether or not a citizen that is defecting along that route can be repatriated and imprisoned in those spaces. All these routes have different lengths, and there will be different reasons throughout the course of the game based on events that are in play as to which events you're going to, or which routes you're going to want to use when traveling. To place a defector route costs the West 1 AP. In order to travel from one location to another, there needs to be a route in place. So if a pawn were stranded here and wanted to advance further into China, a route would need to be constructed first before they'd be able to move along. When we have routes in place, the DPRK can uncover defector routes at a cost of 2 AP as an activity. When uncovering routes, the DPRK has to start with the route closest to DPRK. So in this case, they would need to remove this route before removing any other further routes that have been established. If there are two routes that are equidistant from DPRK, the DPRK player chooses which of the routes to remove. All red routes can be removed with activities. However, routes that are blue are invulnerable to being uncovered by the DPRK and cannot be removed by events either. It's important to note that the route between Ulaanbaatar here in Mongolia that leads back to South Korea is not something that needs to be built, but it can be traveled at all times. So it can never be removed, but it can never be placed either. The source of most of the West's points and final scoring are going to come from defectors. To get those points, they're going to need to conduct defect activities. When defecting, one of these two pawns is going to mark a citizen that is defecting, while the other one traces their route across the defector map. When choosing a citizen to defect, you're going to choose someone from the active generation first, and in the active generation, first you're going to select an unmarked female citizen, as long as there are any. After all of those citizens have been marked, then you may choose unmarked male citizens. For this citizen to defect, it'll cost a base of 1 AP per location that they travel on the defector map. So if I were to play this 3-point card, I'd be able to move a total of 3 spaces on the defector map. And I would have my choice of routes as well. So this route through Thailand is relatively safe but it is longer than trying to cross the Gobi Desert into Mongolia. Whenever you travel across this route segment here, you're going to have to roll a die. If you roll a 5 or a 6, you'll survive moving your pawn across that space. Anything else, you will mark your citizen with a black cube as deceased, and the pawn will have to start over again with a new citizen defecting for further activities. When defecting, adjacency is going to be very important on this defector map. If you had a pawn that you were trying to move that was adjacent to a marked elite, any of these citizens marked with a red disc, it'll increase the cost of moving across the first segment that you travel by 1 AP per elite that you are adjacent to. So in this case, spending a 3-point card to defect with this citizen adjacent to this elite, it would cost an additional point to cross that first segment, and then the third point, each further route would be a single point, or 1 AP to continue moving. It slows down the overall progress of your defector en route, or the defector pawn. If there's more than one citizen adjacent that's an elite, it'll add an additional point. So to defect with this citizen here adjacent these two elites, it would cost 3 points to cross the first segment, and then 1 point for each additional route that you travel. Similarly, if you are defecting with a citizen that is adjacent to an active dissident, they will contribute a single point of AP to your defect activity. So this citizen, using a 3-point card, would actually have a total of 4 points to move along this route. So pretty key to curbing the number of defectors that leave the country is the DPRK activity imprisoning defectors. When you have a defector pawn en route and is located in one of these red locations, that citizen is still susceptible to being imprisoned. The DPRK spends 3 AP. They can mark the citizen that is in the act of defecting as imprisoned, and then remove the pawn on the defector map from the trail. That costs a total of 3 points. Once that citizen is imprisoned, in a future turn, the West would need to select a different citizen and then continue defecting with that citizen. Citizens that are located on blue locations are invulnerable to being imprisoned by that activity. We discussed that adjacency to dissidents and to elites affects the cost of being able to defect. But also these elites on the board, if they're in the active generation, they contribute to the standard of living threshold. But if they are not in the active generation, they'll only have impact of adjacency for people who are defecting if they happen to border on those citizens. To get your citizens into positions where they can impact the gameplay a bit more, the DPRK can use the activity purging an elite. When purging an elite, you mark an elite as deceased, and you will move their marker to another eligible citizen. For elites, if there are any unmarked citizens with white stars in the lower corner, those citizens will need to be made elites before any citizens without white stars in the corner can be promoted. When purging an elite, it costs 1 AP, and you can only purge 1 elite per action round. The West has a special activity called Appeal to the Global Community, where they'll be able to affect the global opinion track. Now, normally, only events that have a global opinion marker on them somewhere in the corner will shift this in either direction. However, if the West chooses to do this special activity, they will be using a West event card. So only blue cards can be used for this activity. And they'll be using the full value of the card to do this activity. What they will be doing is trying to shift the global opinion marker in their favor, one toward the West. What they will do is they will roll the die and then add the value of this card to their die roll. If the total is 6 or more, then they will successfully shift the global opinion over 1. If they fail in their die roll, then the global opinion will remain unchanged. Let's look at the DPRK special activity, Advancing Ballistic Missile Research. This activity is a little bit more complex than a lot of the other activities in this game. When advancing ballistic missile research, you're going to be investing a card and tucking it on the side of the board under ballistic missile research in a given position. Only red cards and gray unassociated event cards are going to be able to be tucked for the purpose of this activity. When advancing ballistic missile research, cards will be played face down, but for the purpose of this example, I'm going to keep the cards face up so you can see what's occurring. So, when advancing ballistic missile research, we're going to look at the map based on the number of third level or star improvements on the board. That will determine what number we tuck a card under. So if I were to advance the ballistic missile research right now, I would choose a DPRK or gray unassociated card, and I would tuck it under the board on this side in the 3 position based on the fact that there are 3 star level improvements. In a future turn, if there was the same number of improvements and I wanted to advance ballistic missile research, I would be adding this card to the same position. However, if in the future, let's say there were more star level improvements on the map, I would be tucking based on the current number of those star level improvements. So why are we advancing the ballistic missile research? In the Songen era of the game, when we're in the white deck, there are 4 missile test events that will come up sporadically throughout the game. When these events are played, they will have a required ballistic missile research level in order to take effect. If that level is met, then the prestige will be raised in DPRK. If the prestige is at high, as we said before, then DPRK will be able to claim victory immediately if they're able to trigger that missile test event. In order to meet this requirement, it's going to be based on the value of the cards that we have tucked and the positions that they're tucked in. So there are 2 things to consider when we are determining our ballistic missile research level. The first consideration is no card or cards in a single position can contribute more in sum than the value of their position. Meaning if I have a total of 5 value cards here in the 3 position, the most they can contribute toward the ballistic missile research is 3. If I have a single card here and it's tucked in the 2 position, because when I played it, initially when doing the activity, there were only 2 star level improvements on the board. This card can only contribute 2, even though it is a 3 value card, to the ballistic missile research. So that's the first consideration. And the second consideration when we're trying to figure out what our ballistic missile research level is it can never be any higher than whatever the highest position card that is tucked. So in this case, we've got this card here that's tucked. It has a value of 3, but it's tucked in the 2 position, so it's only contributing 2. And then we've got another card that's a 2 value tucked under 4. This card requires a ballistic missile research of 5, so we would not be able to meet this ballistic missile research level to trigger the event. However, let's say we got a card here, and this card tucked here. This card would be contributing 2 in the 2 position, and this card is in the 5 position and be contributing a total of 3. So these 2 cards would be contributing a total of 5, and the highest position is 5, requires ballistic missile research level 5. This condition would now be met, and this event would be triggered. When the event is triggered, you'd shift global opinion 1 toward the west, you would raise prestige 1 level, and if prestige were at high already, then DPRK could claim victory. One more note on ballistic missile test events. When the West plays a missile test event, it'll trigger prior to them spending any points from the card on activities or investments. In this case, the West player would see that the ballistic missile research requirement of 5 on this card has not been met by the DPRK because no cards are tucked in that position. So they would spend their 3 AP from this card to conduct activities, but after they're finished, instead of placing this card in the discard pile as normal, they would instead place this card faced up on the BMR track, tucked in the 5 position based on the number of star level improvements on the board. In a future turn, if the event were triggered by either player for this ballistic missile research event, this missile test event requires a level of 4. Now we have a card face up in the position, in the 5 position, so this missile test event requirement would be met, and DPRK would then take all cards that are tucked in any positions, reveal them, and the total value of the BMR to say, hey, this event requirement has been met. As a result, now the global opinion would shift over 1 toward the West, and the prestige level would raise based on the event being a success. And then all of these cards would then be placed in the discard pile. So this wraps up our overview of the rules to No Motherland Without. I hope you find that helpful, and I definitely hope you enjoy the game. If you have any questions regarding rules, feel free to comment on our page on Board Game Geek or on the YouTube channel for Lockhorns Games. Enjoy.